Welcome back to yet another episode of your Re-Educated podcast. Today, I'm so excited for today's conversation. We have with us Amna Mawaz Khan. She is a dancer and somebody I met at the Kaleido Retreat in Switzerland, and I had such a lovely time speaking with her, and so I'm really excited to get into today's conversation. How are you doing?
Hi, it's great to see you again. I'm doing good. I'm back in Pakistan after Switzerland, and it's a real switch, but nice, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually the first episode I'm doing on the Kaleido season, so I'm kind of excited to maybe also just start the conversation maybe by just giving a kind of background into what Kaleido was like and what it was like for you. So first, how did did they reach out to you? Because you gave a workshop and you gave a presentation. So what was your connection to the conference?
It was a very interesting kind of synchronicity of sorts, because two of the organizers, Prashant and Naveen, they got in touch with me after I had a performance in Zurich. And Prashant also came to the performance, and he was interested in my political work and also how I connect that with dance. And so first we had a talk, and he said it would be cool, however you want to do it, you could present something or give a workshop or a talk. And then it kind of culminated into me giving a workshop on different forms that I've learned that are based in the South Asian traditions, and then also culminated into a really interesting discussion. And that's something I wanted to do rather than give a lecture of sorts. So yeah, it was cool. I was in a discussion with two really lovely women. One is a musician and a healer who you know, Tamar, and the other is Anais. And our work kind of intersects in the fact that all three of us intersect our work with other things. So, and especially as women and women who are kind of also using alternative ways of working within society and within ourselves also. So yeah, that's how I managed to get to Kaleido and what I did there.
I'm really glad you were there. Did you have to fly from Pakistan, or were you already somewhere in Europe before you came?
So I had to fly from Pakistan, even though I spent half of my time or more than half my time in Germany, but it was such that I had to be in Pakistan prior to the retreat. So yeah, then I had to fly. Carbon footprint is not so good.
Oops. Yeah, I mean, it was interesting actually, because I think the conference was just so lovely for so many reasons, but one of them is I think sustainability is something I, from a place of privilege, don't think about too often. And I think the conversations that we had and the things that we spoke about really put it front and center. I mean, it's funny because I've done the cross-country road trip in the States multiple times, and to me, that's a big point of pride because it was really challenging in a lot of ways. But it's really interesting when you put it through a different framework. It's actually the most stupid, ineffective thing you can possibly do to get from one side of the country to the other. And so it's just helpful to also have that framework to kind of think about, okay, how are my actions actually impacting the planet in a larger scale than just is it convenient or is it enjoyable for myself? I think I'm really curious for you, what were some of the kind of biggest themes that you felt like Kaleido brought up or challenged maybe some ways of thinking that you may have had prior?
I think exactly what you talked about. For me also, sometimes I don't even know if it's a place of privilege. Often it is. It's also one doesn't think about it because it's often, especially in let's say in the Pakistani activist circles, of course, there's a lot of discourse coming up now in the past decade, let's say, about climate change and the impact on climate, especially with Pakistan being one of the frontline countries for the effects, the devastation of climate change. But still, somehow, a lot of traditional, let's say, leftists will kind of put that aside and say, like, yes, okay, but climate is not as important because, Pakistan, uh, what is that? It emits like 1% of the kind of global emissions and yet has to face these terrible floods almost yearly now. And so often for me also, I would be like, when I'm in Germany, I am more careful when I'm thinking about the climate. And when I'm in Pakistan, of course, I try to reduce whatever my footprint may be, but still the kind of abject other circumstances that one is confronted with in terms of, let's say, just poverty, precarity, violence, all those things, then climate somehow seems like some topic that should not be the thing that needs to be in the front. But
Mm.
things that were said at Kaleido really made me think and made me reflect on this that actually, and yes, at an intellectual level, they're all connected. Everything is connected in this big web of, let's say, whether it's injustice to the climate or on the economy or stuff like that, but it's all connected. And I think it kind of forced me, especially some talks by people who said that, without like talking and putting climate in the forefront, or the environment and even non-human species in front, there will be no more discourse on anything else if there is complete devastation, which we are hurtling to. So that was really amazing to kind of recalibrate, and kind of say, okay, now take a moment. And I think right now, coming back also, I'm like really absorbing a lot of things that were said, even in our interpersonal discussions or listening to people talk and present. I think it's very, what really hit me the most about Kaleido and what really moved me is just trying to see how all of these confluences, like there were engineers, there were biologists, there were musicians, healers, writers, so many different kinds of people who usually don't meet on the outside, so called. But here we're forced to kind of live together and exchange over so many days that it really opens up the mind, the heart and the mind also. So yeah,
Yeah.
that was my biggest takeaway.
I think that's a great way of putting it, opening up the heart and the mind, which I think is really unique for a conference, because oftentimes it might just be that your mind that's opened, or if you happen to go to like a spiritual retreat, then it might only be your heart that's open. But to kind of have both at the same time challenges you in so many ways, and makes you realize the connection that your interpersonal journey has with your intellectual and like the external journey, and how compatible they are in so many unique, complex ways. Before, I'm really excited to kind of get into peace and activism and all the other really cool things that you do. But I wanted to first lay the foundation and the context of who Amna is. So you grew up in Pakistan. I would love to know kind of how you found your way into dance, how you fell in love with it, and kind of paint the picture in some ways of what your childhood looked like.
Oh.
A hard task.
um, I'm going to try and keep it short, but true. So I come from a very privileged background. So I also, a few of the women of this country who were able to get, like, let's say, the so-called best. When I say best, it means also an English medium, very like post-colonial education. Um, or yeah, colonial education. Let's just keep it to that. Also, is fine. But yet, because of that, I was able to access a lot of kinds of knowledge, and also in these spheres of the so-called cultural elite. I was introduced to my dance teacher by my mother, actually, who never thought that I would ever take up dance as a profession. And actually, what is usually done is girls from this so-called class background are put into a dance class, often to become more marriageable, like
Mm.
to be more graceful and all of those things. So when I was put into this class, I didn't have any idea what it was. I had just kind of seen a Kathak performance by a dancer called Nahid Siddiqui. She's amazing, phenomenal dancer. And I just kind of brought it up with my mom that, hey, I'd like to learn too. And because dance is not such a popular topic and the like a larger aspect in Pakistani society, because there's this connection to India, right? Because it's pre-partition, pre uh, colonialism. There's these roots that show in every culture, like there's dance and music and theater, and so somehow in this, it's very convoluted. Sorry, I was trying to keep it simple, but
No, 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 no. Keep going. No,
but
no, keep going.
but somehow these contradictions, because of class and privilege, can be kind of overcome by so-called high culture and all of this jargon. So there's a small group of people who are so-called cultured and who appreciate classical music and classical dance, as they call it. And so I happened to be in this circle, but my mother asked around. And so there was one lady in the whole city who was teaching these styles, so Kathak and Bharatanatyam. And her name is Indu Mitha. And at the time, this is, let's say, around 20 odd years ago, 25 years ago. And she was teaching this class of 20 girls. And by the end of the year, I think there was 5 girls. And then after that, there was maybe 3 girls. And then, yeah, and it was very gendered also, of course. So we had no boys in the class at the time. And yeah, so I learned under her and I became so fascinated with her as a personality. She's a real like institution because without the structure, without state support, without even private support, she kind of took what she learned in Kalakshetra in the 50s and from a Kalakshetra trained teacher, and she kind of translated that into for what she felt was more palatable to a more northern Pakistani society. And her whole life, she was just teaching dance. And she translated the mudras, the hand gestures, she translated them all from Sanskrit into Urdu. And she changed a lot of the themes of the stories because during the Indian nation building project, a lot of these dances also became really Brahminized and also very like taken out of, let's say, the Tamil and the more folk like deity stories into more like hegemonic stories of Shiva and Parvati, which were there. But anyhow, the point is she tried to secularize the dance form, and which is also a task in itself, right? For one person to do that. And also, yeah, so when I started learning under her, I was so fascinated with her. And it somehow gave me some kind of, I don't know. I think there was also like, she's like a mother figure to me also. So there was a lot of that happening. And then I kind of stayed on with her. And slowly, I think I absorbed this movement, this desire to be easy to move, like to feel like movement is part of my language. And because of that, I think I slowly began to get some shows here and there. I think, let's say, after a decade or 15 years or so, I also graduated with an Arangetram, which is it's a graduation diploma performance thing. And yeah, so then after that, I was teaching dance, sometimes to children, so very much freelance also. And around 2017, I got offered a job at the PNCA, which is the Pakistan National Council of Arts, as the choreographer, and I was hired for the job of choreographing a dance drama based on an ancient civilization called the Mehergarh civilization that is found in present-day Balochistan. So that's how I was hired, and then slowly I was teaching, and I was working for the first time with a lot of professional working class dancers who are employed by the government and paid really terribly low and have precarious lives. But for the first time, my dance trajectory came out of kind of this circle of elitists, um, in this
Mm.
way. And then parallel, that's another story. I don't know if we want to get into that, but this is my dance history, let's say.
Yeah. No, I mean, thank you for sharing. I think it's I'm writing a piece right now on passion, and I have been thinking a lot about what is passion actually. Figuring out what it is quite complex. And I wanted to ask you, one, do you feel like dancing is your passion? And if so, what does that mean? And two, were there ways that you feel like your teacher kind of taught or presented dance that made it easier to connect with it than perhaps if a different person had taught it to you?
Hmm. That's a really good question. Uh, I think I'll answer the second part first, which is that I think my teacher definitely she kind of infused so much passion for this form because of just how she would teach it with such a kind of she was very strict also, which I think now when I'm teaching I try and like be more relaxed about it, but I think that sometimes to pursue a passion you need to have someone on your case telling you you need to focus, you need to get on it, you need to um no that's the till there I would say. But then how passion for me then changes is also that a few years ago I began learning under somebody called Sai Kripa and online, and she's in Chennai and I was in Germany, so it was all online, and we were learning how to count for the dance form. So it's called Sulkattu, and and it's very difficult, and my maths is terrible. So I would just be like, oh, I can't do this, and then she would say something very beautiful, and she would say, "You need to find that balance between controlling and letting go. If you
Hmm.
if you're controlling it too much, then it's just mechanical. And if you let go too much, then you've lost it completely." So it's always in this flow, like, in all these, let's say, indigenous knowledge systems, it's all about keeping in that kind of between this, in the stillness, you're moving, or in the movement, you're still. So it's always these kind of interesting dichotomies that kind of get holistic, let's say, when you become one with both things, like to find that balance. So passion in itself, for me, I would say dance is not my passion per se. My passion perhaps is to, which I've kind of in my later years, now that I'm 35, I can say that. But I realized my passion was always to kind of break the boundaries. And by breaking boundaries, I don't mean to like become a pioneer in something, or think about it in a way of getting a name, so called, for myself. It's not that. It's more to do with challenging what is being imposed. So from my childhood, and I can speak for, I think, most of the people living in this country, is so much policing on your body. And as a woman, especially, your body is policed from your birth to your death. And even for men, I would say, men have to behave a certain way. They have to be. So dance in that way kind of breaks that, tries to confront it. And because of my connection to some political groups and my training in let's say resistance politics through really lovely a beautiful community of leftists, um, I realized that the style of dance I was learning was also heavily embedded in casteism, in classism. So I also kind of I'm in still in a process. It's been a few years now that I'm trying to break out of this kind of corseting of the body But that's the language I learned, right? So this dance form is very highly classified and everything is angular and has become so over the years. But coming back to passion, I think passion is in itself a madness, and you don't ever know when that madness hits you. So sometimes the passion is dance, sometimes the passion is trying to amplify the voice of people who are not heard or seen. The passion could also be creating a completely absurd piece. But my passion actually lies in collaboration. I think I really, really, really love creating pieces with people across forms. So whether it's with words or with music or dance or film, my passion is to create with others, which is weird, right? Because what is that really? But yeah, I think that's my passion. And I think for people to actually find out what their passion is, it's also a lot of moments of madness that overcome one in phases like complete joy or complete sorrow or rage, and then finding a language to express that. It could also just be a poem, it could be a video, anything, some kind of expression that connects to the outside. And that could be any form. Could be
Wow.
data science also, maybe. Right? You're a data scientist.
Yeah.
I
I mean,
Googled you.
no, this is beautiful. I mean, thank you, one, for sharing. I mean, I think what I notice with a lot of just students that I work with, and I see it even with people in their 20s, and there's this lack of joy in the things that they do. And to offset that, they go on this journey of, I'm going to find my passion. I'm going to find the thing that I care about. And what I see is the more they search, the less they become unsure of whether they'll ever find it. Because the belief is somehow it exists in a thing. There's like an action where this action makes me feel good, and somehow that action is going to make me feel good forever, which, like you said, will never be the case. I think I really wanted to touch back on what your teacher said, finding the balance between control and letting go. Oftentimes, those spaces of control won't feel really good. Having to be like, I have to wake up early and go do this, I would much rather be sleeping, is not a time where you'll be so joyful in doing it. But that intricate dance between figuring out where you want to lie, that process is the thing that can cultivate the space for passion to grow. I think, like a lot of what you said, where your passion is not necessarily dance, but dance is a medium through which you're able to break boundaries and express your freedom. That is something that can be now expressed through so many different things. It can be expressed through the way you speak, the way you dress yourself, the way you act. I think when you can tie into like a deeper kind of ethos like that, then you become a passionate person. And I think that's like what I'm working on this piece, really trying to focus that, which is like the focus should be on becoming a passionate person, not finding a passion. I think they're very two different things. And I think one never just finds one passion. I think that just doesn't exist. And so I feel like a lot of what you're saying must have come from so many years of thinking about, do I want to still dance? Do I want to switch over to something else? Was that a big part of your journey, that tug and pull of like, I want to let this go? Or what was that like for you?
Yeah, there was a period where um, there was a film made on my teacher, my first teacher, and it was interpreted in a very strange way by her family, that it was seen that I was trying to take over her legacy and become a star because of a film made by two amateur filmmakers, where they kind of followed me a little bit in the film. And so it became really ugly after the film was released. And at that point, I thought, hey, I took up dancing because I was in love with this person, which is obviously a really stupid reason to start anything in this way, right? Like you think, but no, I don't know if it's stupid, but sorry, I say a lot of
It's okay.
contradictory things.
It's
But the
fine.
point is that, of course, then I was just like, what have I been doing this for in the most hostile place, right? Okay, I come from a privileged family, but the fact is, beyond the sphere of my two parents, even in my extended family. And also, let's say, to be honest, nobody really supported me. I did whatever I did on my own, and no real structure was there to kind of be like, okay, here's some funding, or here you could perform this. And somehow it was always the alternate structures that somehow gave me space, like the political spaces or the feminist spaces. And but at this point, which is, let's say, 4 years ago, I did say, oh, why am I doing this? Like, what is the point? Anyways, I get criticism that you are dancing in this form that is already very problematic, or B, you are sexualizing the female body, or C, you could be doing more so-called serious things with your politics than doing this. But then I realized, actually, even if I don't dance, it's still in me, right? Like it's then somebody, again, the person who said you have to find the balance between the power and the loss of it. She said, "Who told you you chose this dance form?" You know, she just
Mm.
said it very like matter of fact. Like, who said, when I said I don't think I want to dance, and I just want to know about the style and the structure and theory, but I'm not going to dance again. And she, yeah, that's what she said. She said, "Who told you that you chose it?" And then, of course, I mean, I'm not one to be too esoteric, but it is true. We kind of fall into things and flow into things and trip over things like passions or like life choices that we didn't plan for. We have plans, and then those plans keep changing. And yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
100%. And part of that is it's something that on my journey I feel like I've been having a hard time with, which is like letting go in a lot of ways to allow for that randomness to happen upon you. You can't control, okay, this will happen at this point, that will happen at that point. You
Yeah.
just never know. And I
Yeah. I
think
think
that can
it's.
sometimes be really scary.
I think you're completely right about this. And the way to kind of anchor oneself is to have an intentionality that, okay, I
Mm,
want this. And if it happens, I will work for it. And I know there are other forces and everything, time, space, other people, complete random accidents can change it completely. But as long as I know my intention, I think then you get into a flow of reaching something, some realization, not completeness, but a kind of a process, because nothing is really static. And that's why I find dance also such a beautiful analogy for everything in life, is that everything is moving. I mean, even the mountains move, even the trees move. Everything that we think is static is actually in harkat, as they say, in movement. And that's it. That once we have that planted that seed of intentionality for what do I want? What makes me happy? How can I spread that happiness? And that happiness in itself is a very revolutionary thing, especially in the current state of affairs where there's just complete doom and destruction all around on so many scales. But just that joy that spreads, that's so linked to passion, right? Like how you said
mm,
it earlier also.
mm. You mentioned something really interesting that I'm fascinated to get to. I'm also thinking in my head right now how many questions I have for you. I'm like, no, this car, I need more than 1 hour. But I want to talk a little bit about, you talked a little bit about high culture. I really, really, really like this word, and it's something that I find so fascinating because one, maybe we can start here and we can get into that. What do you think it is about music, dance, art, film that somehow makes it exist in every culture everywhere? It's not something that only one group of people somewhere does. There seems to be something just within what it means to be human that makes you want to move your body when you hear a rhythm, that makes you want to write words and poetry and to express something that cannot be done just through words. And I've been fascinated by how for the longest time in our history, we've always been called to these things where it makes you question whether to be human is to actually engage in these forms of silent communication. So, what are your thoughts on What have you found? Why is it within us?
That's such a beautiful question. Very nice. But yeah, I just like this question, so I'm going to let it settle.
Yeah.
I do think it has to do with communication essentially, which is like communication sounds like such a word, no? But it's also to align oneself when you hear a beat and you want to move, or when you see something gorgeous and you want to hold it. I don't think it's just about controlling that space, like wanting to take a bite of it. I think it's also to become one with it. That's also one way of seeing that. Why do people create these art forms? It also, when one reaches like a hal, as they say, hal is the state of not madness, but it's like kind of like a sacred madness, which is like beyond all logic and all of that. Somehow, through music, through dance, through poetry, you find yourself trying to align with what seems to be true and what is beautiful. Like, what is beautiful? Of course, beauty nowadays, when we talk about beauty, there's the standards of beauty, but somehow, when you strip that all out, which is basically what we were talking about, joy, to feel joyous and this infectious joyfulness. And even there is a certain joy, or let's maybe the word joy, that's the problem with words. They don't really cut it. I think there's, even when you want to express something painful, right? Or something about rage, and you're doing it in your element of just completely. Sometimes there are these moments of complete clarity, and from these forms you find that those, like, you can express yourself in that element you're feeling. And I think that's why I said communication, because somehow a lot of people say, oh, I do art for art's sake, and oh, everything is somehow linked to the outside, and it is connected to the society or the community. What we take in as children in forms of trauma or beautiful memories, they build up and build up and build up, and then we think we can give back, or we even give back in our childhood. But directing our thoughts and our feelings and our intentions using this silent communication, as you say, is inherent in, I think, like you say, across the globe. And it's just a way of reaching oneness. And that's why they say things like, oh, music is universal. But all of these forms are universal, actually.
Hmm. I wrote down to be seen and to be understood. It feels like two very essential things that perhaps cause us to move or to create. I want to now connect this to this concept of high culture, because I think it's terribly unfortunate when now you strip away people's ability to engage in these things because of class, caste, so on and so forth. I feel really deeply connected to this because my family has always felt growing up that because we are not of a certain caste, none of us are meant to be dancers, or none of us were meant to be artists and singers. And I have found that as I've grown into my deep love for dance, how much of that is a lie. There was no controlling of what my body was meant to do. There was no genetic factor that, oh, I was just not capable of dancing. I was not capable of singing. Maybe not capable of singing, but but
Yeah, I'm sure you
um,
can say.
yeah, no, I can, and I think that in itself is, a certain mental kind of limitation that I've placed on myself from hearing so many things of like, oh, maybe I'm not meant to do these things, and it's meant for other people. Why do you think this kind of separation of art, why do people try to control it to say other people can't partake in this, but we can? Where does that come from, do you think?
I think this exactly, if you inverse it, actually, the fact that it's an actual fact. So, for example, like Bharatanatyam comes from, it was a hereditary dancer lineage that used to dance this, and they were not high caste. I mean, they weren't, they were like kind of middle caste, let's say, but, and also very woman oriented, in the sense that women of that caste called Isai Velalar, they were land owning, they were very sexually free in many ways. That kind of pissed off a lot of people. And also a lot of these dance forms, even Kathak, let's say, I'm talking about the styles that I know of, but I'm very sure, a lot of like the Roma music, the Roma dances that have been co-opted, the Black African American dance forms that are then co-opted, right, into this so-called high culture. And of course, yes, it's not so blatantly there, but you know that there are influences of people who are not allowed in these upper echelons of power. But actually, a lot of the music, a lot of the dance is stolen. And there was actually a Devadasi act. So the hereditary dancers who danced this style of Bharatanatyam were banned from dancing it because the style then got co-opted into a nation building project, and so called, as it has been recorded, they wanted women from upper caste and supposedly good families to dance this form to show how pure the nation state is, right? So I think this is exactly it, that then these forms then get co-opted and used to kind of build a certain narrative of purity and a pure high culture, right? That is then inaccessible to people like you said yourself, and also to me, for example. Even though I come from this so-called higher class, for a woman to dance is a terrible thing in public. Like when I tell some people when I in Pakistan that I dance, I don't even now I refrain from it, because I think anyways they'll find out one day. If we ever get close enough, they'll see what I do for a living. But now I just say, oh, I'm an artist, because when you say you're a dancer, it's seen as you are a sex worker. And so there is so much policing on who gets to claim a form, just because that form is then part of the narrative of those who are in power to say that, yes, this is ours. So to claim an art form is a very political thing.
Hmm. And I guess this is the connection to why, you said earlier that art can both be a form of rebellion, but it can also be a tool of the state. Can you explain a little bit more on that concept? Because I think it's really interesting that it can be used for oppressive means, but it can also be used to liberate oneself.
Yeah, for sure. I think art, because I love how you said silent communication. It's there was a dancer called Chandra Lekha who talks about the psychological effect of dance, but then I would say across the forms, right? So the psychological impact that that a form has on somebody who is consuming it or watching it or even part of it actively, rather than just as an audience member, it stays with you emotionally. It stays with you because the person producing it has put in their emotions, like beyond just the intellect. It's the heart. It's all of the body memory that is involved in producing a work of art. And so it's super powerful. And certain songs become anthems for revolutions, or certain movements, even like a gesture becomes like symbolic of resistance. And therefore, on the other side, when it's used as a tool by the state, I mean, we can see across the board, like Hollywood, just a small example, how superheroes and their theme songs and all of that, underneath, if you scratch under all of it, it's basically about how everything is set in New York and how the bad guys are, of course, the Muslims, but first they were communists, and then before that they were someone else. But like these really basic kind of propaganda messages that are then kind of taken in by people, like even in the global south, who are consuming this, that then becomes the narrative, that what is things like what is considered beautiful or what is considered powerful, and what is a man, what is a woman, at that very basic level also, then it's reified and kind of reinforced, let's say, by state, and by not just state but also people who are part of a cultural elite, let's say. um, it's crazy, right? Because it's not just movies, it's also music, um, like national anthems. They're so bizarre, right? National anthems. Like the national anthem of Pakistan is written in a language that nobody here even speaks. It's written in very classical Farsi, in Persian, and no one knows what it is. And I'm currently writing on a drama serial that is funded by the military over here. And there is one episode where it's just like all the characters in this drama serial are shamed and made to feel really bad because they don't know what the national anthem means. And it's so
Mm.
bizarre because it's not a language they even speak. It's a very interesting psychological effect on people. I think there was a guy called Antonio Gramsci. He wrote about coercion and consent. And I think using art for building consent for the status quo is an age old practice. Actually, it's something even before modern nation states. There's like the court cultures, so the dance forms or the music that was created in the courts then became seen as the standard of high culture, even though it
Mm.
was created by people not from those classes, like we discussed earlier. It's really messy, huh?
Yeah. I mean,
It's so
so,
messy.
something that's coming up for me right now is I had this question of, can a certain action only be a means of liberation if that same action is also used as a form of control? I feel like I'm curious if, for example, let's say you were free to dance and move however you wanted, and not a single person would say something about it. I'm curious if someone would still feel liberated when they were moving, if there wasn't also a form of like control of, you shouldn't move it like this or you shouldn't do something like that, you know? And often it doesn't even have to be imposed by another. Sometimes it can be imposed by your own body's limitations. So running faster than you thought you could, or it could sometimes be the limitations you put on yourself. But it's actually this feeling of liberation, I think, is something that's so important and something to highlight, because I think oftentimes this conversation of oppression, oppressed, it can make people feel as if there's a group of people who have no oppression whatsoever, and they're just like just flying around so happy on the planet. But from what I've experienced, I think everyone to some extent feels oppressed in some way or another. And obviously there's like varying degrees of that. But I think children often feel oppressed by their parents or by adults or people who don't take them seriously for how young they are, or older, really, aging people might feel oppressed by youth because they're not able to actually be taken seriously. Or and so it becomes actually really small, and like maybe you have freckles on your face and people kind of have made you feel some type of way for that, and you don't feel confident to speak. Or so I think in some ways this feeling of liberation is a process that every human can and it's can go through, and it's something to really focus on. And so connecting this conversation back to the main themes in Kaleido, which was peace and liberation, how do you feel that dance has kind of helped you find a way to find peace? And one, we can maybe talk about what peace is first, which I think would be really interesting. But I'm really curious to understand kind of what that journey has been like for you, and if it
Mhm.
has.
Mhm. I think, yeah, your question and your comment is really integral to this idea of peace in itself, because, like you said, no one is not oppressed, even the so called oppressor, right? We have this huge, ugly person, evil, horrible person committing violence and just messing up everybody's life. Even they are oppressed. The oppressor in themselves, the oppressors, those who profit off other people's suffering, are oppressed for this very reason, that they can't feel, or maybe they do feel, I mean, we are all at some point oppressing. I think that's part of also life is this, let's say the I don't like using dark and light energy because that's also very colonial. But for the purpose of understanding, I think something which is oppressive and something that is liberating, they go hand in hand. It's always kind of like a dualism that goes
Mm,
together. And it's peace, I think, is linked to this, is coming back to what Sayaka said about finding the balance between control and letting go, is something like this kind of state. And it's constantly in motion. Somebody recently told me, oh, I've healed. I'm done. I've healed. And I just found it, it's mean of me, but I began to laugh because how can you ever be in one fixed position of being healed, especially forget life's traumas on the body and the intergenerational stuff, but what's happening on a global level to even non-human species? How can you be just healed, and it's constant. It's this as you say about how some forms can be liberatory in many ways. I don't even know if liberatory is a word, but
mm,
you know what I mean.
mhm,
But I think yeah, so these forms can be used, and they can be used to liberate oneself from oneself, right? But they're never static positions. Like you know about these writer blocks, artist blocks. All these blocks happen only because it's part of the process. And peace is something always, I think it's always a flow. It's never static. And especially now, I mean, it's a constant struggle to find peace. And then there are these amazing moments, these surprising moments where one feels it. And to be able to sustain that feeling, and you can do it through dance, and you can do it through art, and like painting or writing or conversing or just listening, also being kind of receiving and finding peace in that mode. I think that is very important to kind of practice a culture of finding peace within oneself so that it can be reproduced outside, because then it's a privilege to find peace because we are not hungry at night. We eat, we find some rest when we're not jet lagged, and we have clothes, and we have homes to shelter us. So somehow I think it's also our duty to find that peace and to be able to magnify it. And that's
mm,
what I found very interesting also about Kaleido, was to kind of be able to share this a space together, whether that means an emotional space. You remember they had this wheel of emotions,
amazing.
and
It was
it was
amazing.
very interesting because I would feel, wow, why is someone feeling? Some people would put stones. Maybe you can explain that wheel better, but just in, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really yes. Thank you for reminding me about this too, because I really wanted to speak about it when I record my solo episode on Kaleido. But the wheel was basically, and I don't want to forget where you were saying something really interesting, so I definitely want to make sure you have a pin on that because I wanted to really hear that thought. But the wheel was basically they had a bunch of emotions. They had like preliminary emotions like anger, and then anger would then be split up into three sub kind of more specific emotions like um, fear or something like that. And there were a bunch of stones, and whenever you wanted to go to this wheel, you could place stones on how you were feeling that day. And so from day to day, time to time, you can actually see how everyone's emotions in the entire group was changing after a certain workshop. What were people feeling? Because there were so much things that happened that made people feel fear or anger, because a lot of your own views were you would feel conflicted. And so it was beautiful to kind of see that process of change. Yes, back to you.
Yeah, exactly. So seeing somebody feel like, if there was one that said, I don't feel seen or something, like ignored. I
Mm,
feel ignored. And some people felt overwhelmed and some felt sad. And but then it would keep changing. And that was what was very interesting, was that people kept changing things. And of course, some people feel good sometimes, and it's also very hormonal, right? There are so many things that are just there because of chemistry also. So it's very confusing. So peace could, I remember when my mother got sick, we took her to a doctor, a neurosurgeon, and he said, oh yeah, just I'm going to give all these antidepressants because at the end of it, we we're just a bunch of chemicals and we need to just figure. So that's also a way of looking at it. Obviously, that didn't work out so well, right? Because we're not chemicals. But I think sometimes to go into each extreme is also like, so for me, peace can also link to the time of the lunar calendar or the sun or where we're placed. I think it's so many things that nobody really is able to combine each and every aspect of what peace is. And that's it. That's why I think, like a body, we're all organs and atoms that have our own experiences. But once they come together, and once we're in a capacity to listen as well as speak, I think both things are so important, to speak and listen. And I think that helps to establish a space of peace, a peaceful space, a safe space, as they say. In my years of organizing with people politically, I noticed, especially when there's things that are really like, getting to people. For example, these days when I was in Germany, let's say for a few months before now, I was organizing with some students who were organizing on the issue of Palestine, and I noticed something, and that I noticed it years ago in Pakistan, in these spaces of organizing. And they're all peaceful groups, and they want peace, and it's a lot of peace, 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 and against violence and all of that. But then I realized there's always within groups, there's some people who take too much space and some people who just listen, or just not even listen. I feel like they just turn off. And I think to establish a place of peace is to find a balance between active and, what's the opposite of active? I don't want to say dormant, but more like
Passive?
passive or
No.
receptive.
Yeah, receptive is better.
I feel like that balance is
Yeah.
the, at least for humans to be able to find a peaceful space, is that.
Mhm. Something that's coming to my mind that I'm really curious to hear what you think about, and it's a lofty question, but I think when having all these education conversations, one of the most important parts is thinking about what would a future look like? What is a different future than what we have now, which in some way or another is better. I think something you brought up earlier, which is really important, is that peace is not something that can, it seems, in its essence, just be sustained forever. It feels that this kind of like tug and pull of like wanting peace, but also sometimes craving chaos, and kind of having that natural balance seems very intrinsic to what the human experience contains. But so then when we think about a future where we live in harmony or peace, but also understanding that chaos is a natural part of something that humans desire, how do we kind of, will we always be in a state of non-peace then? What does a better world look like that's different than what we have now if this kind of tug and pull is kind of essential in some ways, perhaps?
I think that in a better world, or in a future where a utopia of sorts, this kind of allowing that chaos to come in. Like today I was in a school, in a classroom with 5-year-olds, and the the kind of education systems that we have on the mainstream, let's say, are so there. I remember one of the teachers, she said to a student, he must have been 5 or so, and kids get restless and they want chaos. They need chaos, because if you don't have chaos, then you can't be a child also sometimes, right? Like, and even adults need to be children. So finding a chaos that is not violent, maybe. I'm just wondering. So anyhow, the teacher, going back to the anecdote, she told him, why are you talking like this? You cannot talk out of turn. this is a classroom. Now, can you imagine a 5-year-old being like, what? And of course, then they keep wanting chaos and they want their own way of being. Even nature is chaotic, right? And I just wonder, is it really the opposite of peace? Is chaos really the opposite of peace? Or
Mm.
is there a secret ingredient that makes chaos completely like, I just wonder, like violence
Mm.
for sure. Can there be a violent peace also? I'm just wondering.
Mm. That is a good question.
I don't know. Is
Yeah.
there? Is that?
No,
I think it's a dumb
that's a good
question
question.
somehow. But
No, I don't think that's dumb at all. I think that is where the nuance I think of this conversation exists. It's not that that's so interesting. Yeah, even putting those two at the opposite could actually be wrong. Putting peace and chaos aside, like perhaps there's a state of stasis and there's a state of chaos, but peace can be found within both, possibly. And that might actually be
yeah,
the challenge, the
yeah.
same way we talked about earlier, how the challenges of control and letting go. Perhaps another one of these like dichotomies
And
is
when you
finding
talk
peace
of
within both.
passion, and
Hmm.
when you talk of passion, also somehow it comes into
Hmm.
this chaos. That there is to be able to have a passion, you need to also find a kind of space within that storm, to let go. That, and I think it's very cyclical, also, isn't it? Like even when we look at nature, when you plant a seed and when it cracks open, and then it's quite a chaotic scene happening all around us, but it's kind of, it looks like there's a pattern to it,
Hmm.
that nothing is ever static. I think there's a really great writer. His name is David Graeber. He recently passed away, and he wrote a book called The Dawn of Everything with
Hmm.
somebody called David Wengrow. And one is an anthropologist, one is an archaeologist, and both are anarchists. And they are try to uncover. It's a huge book. I've not been able to finish it yet, but in one part, they're trying to uncover how. I mean, when did inequality becomes such a static thing in society? So, and also that peace, like there are times of peace, there have been times of war, but somehow the inequality was always something that was challenged in many ways. But that's where I'm trying to get at, but maybe not getting there with this idea of static situations actually being possibly what I don't want in the future, right? Like I would say,
Hmm.
for a peaceful future, I think things would have to be in a flow, and letting go also. I think this capitalistic desire to control everything, and not just capitalistic, also patriarchal, so like on bodies, and also on so many levels, casteist and racist. And I think there's always this desire to control and kind of just straitjacket what it means to be somebody.
Yeah.
And once our definitions are more fluid, possibly we can be more peaceful.
I think I
I
have
don't
an
know.
idea. I have an idea. I have an idea. I think I solved it. I solved humanity's problems. Okay. All right,
Give
hear
it,
me out.
give it
All right,
here.
hear me out. Okay. So I was born with a condition called club feet. It sucks. I had a surgery when I was young. It changes kind of the structure of my legs and everything. But if I had a magic pill to eradicate that experience, I'm not actually sure I would do that. And the reason I'm saying that is because I think I found my love for dance and movement and a joy for my body only because I had that happen. And one thing that I'm thinking is I think every human needs essentially some kind of person to like overcome. It could be your father, it could be your society. I think it makes life a lot more enjoyable living when you have like, I am going to overcome this thing or person. But the joy comes in the process of you overcoming it and feeling like you're actually moving in that direction. Where it can feel really crippling is if you feel like you're not actually moving in that direction at all. So maybe, and this is obviously a joke, but hypothetically, let's say we have the craziest AI in the world, and it figures out when you're born your capacity for overcoming, and it gives you challenges the perfect amount that you can strive your entire life, but eventually you will overcome it. And every single person is given the challenge that they can overcome. If you happen to believe in God, then maybe that's what people who believe in God believe, that God has that's why they say like, oh, the God gives his hardest challenges to his hardest work. Something, there's some
Mhm.
quote like that. But maybe that's kind of like this idea, because even in the example that you gave, like dancing is joyful when it comes out of, okay, someone has told me not to do this, but now I'm going to do it, and I feel the joy from that because of that. And I think if you remove any form of kind of control like that, then maybe everyone will just be like lost of like, okay, well now nothing really, I don't really feel, but maybe I'm wrong, because I've normalized feeling oppressed in that sense. I'm really curious to understand what it would be like if there was, it would be so fascinating to see.
This is really beautiful, especially since it's the Kaleido series. There was a workshop by a guy called Patrick on Aikido. And
Mm,
I think that principle of he made us pretty much embody fear and see how it feels when you're resisting fear out of the space of just not wanting it near you, as opposed to seeing what is coming, like seeing in your mind's eye, of course, but like feeling fear, but then repurposing it into something that can be used as as a strength, so like the hand that is pushing you, you're not resisting it, but you become part of it. And while you become part of it, you it loses all its power. And that was brilliant, actually. And this analogy came to me right now when you were talking about overcoming. I think, like, I see many people who for many many years they're still stuck in this idea of, like, not victimhood, but more like, for example, in a society where there's a lot of patriarchy, and just saying, yeah, I hate all men and all men are terrible and fuck men and so blah. Sorry for my language.
mhm.
But not realizing that actually it's an intersectional thing, and that the men that one hates or feels like they have to resist or rebel against, that is definitely the first step. But once you overcome that factor that's causing you, is it a factor, maybe, that factor should not still stand like it's some deity in front of you, because then your journey
Mm,
stops there. I think once you overcome, you must overcome also that fear and that hatred into a kind of much more outwardly looking, expansive uh, vision, And that's where then community comes in. And I think that's why it's so important when one talks about spirituality to link political work also. Because once one, and it's constantly very, again, it happens at a parallel level. It's not like one accomplishes nirvana and then has to go out into society, or the other way around. I think that's when, I mean, when we talk about community and support systems, when you are trying to overcome something, to share that experience with somebody else by producing art or just talking or just sitting together in silence also, but just feeling the other person, wherever you feel like there is a kind of resonance. I feel that then the strength of overcoming or to attain a certain feeling of peace and love and joy is much more magnified when you find other
mm.
people. And that's why I said collaboration is my passion. um, because it is in those moments I feel clear and light and also deep, and I feel like there is a purpose then when I'm connecting, not just alone but with others.
Wow. I'm really glad for this segment of the conversation. I feel like I haven't. I was really excited to do that in Kaleido, and just to theorize what a world of peace would even look like. I think it's something that seems so far from our imagination that it takes a lot of creativity and to really think out of the box to kind of envision that world. It's Amazing. I mean, today we spoke about dance, passion, oppression, peace. We haven't even touched feminism. I think we're going to have you back again for one more episode because I think there's so
I'd
much to
love
explore
to.
just about that entire space and to connect it all kind of both of these conversations back to education. But I want to say thank you so much for your time and this was
Thank
such a fruitful,
you
lovely conversation.
for this journey. I feel like I was on a magic carpet.
Yeah, so lovely. Yes.
Nice.
Yes, that is my
Nice.
favorite part of a good conversation. It does feel like you embarked on a journey.
Yeah. Thank you, Gautam.
And that brings us to the end of our conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you again for listening and making this process so much more enjoyable. If you haven't had the chance to already, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts to get the latest updates on new episodes. If you've been learning useful information here, feel free to leave a review as well. A little bit goes a long way in spreading this podcast. And have a wonderful day. And as per usual, stay re-educated.